A man dies, then dies again. How can that be? Welcome to Eco Mysteriosa. I am your host, Arvela. Tell me, where are you joining from today? Your words keep this mystery alive. Let's begin. The June afternoon in St. Mary Mead had been of the sort that inspired garden parties. The lawns of Colonel Lucius Carston's house, an immaculate Georgian residence known locally as the Grange, were alive with bright parasols, tinkling laughter, and the clatter of teacups. Tables groaned under the weight of cucumber sandwiches, Victoria sponges, and pitchers of homemade lemonade. Ladies in pastel dresses admired roses climbing over trellises, while the Colonel himself, tall, still broad-shouldered despite his advancing years, played genial host with a booming voice and polished manners. It was, on the surface, the very image of English village tranquillity. Children darted about in games of tag, dogs yapped at their heels, and elderly gentlemen gathered under a chestnut tree to discuss cricket. One might have thought nothing ever went amiss in such a place, and yet, even as the bells of St. Mary Mead's church tolled 4 o'clock in the distance, something darker stirred beneath the sunlit gaiety. Miss Jane Marple, seated unobtrusively near the hydrangeas with her knitting in hand, observed it all with her usual air of gentle detachment. To those who knew her only by reputation, she was a sweet spinster with a penchant for wool and gossip. But those who knew her better, and they were fewer than most imagined, understood that behind her mild eyes lay a mind that missed very little. She caught the faint tension when Colonel Carston's hand lingered too long on the arm of Mrs. Lydia Harcourt, the young and striking widow recently arrived in the village. She noticed the quick dart of a glance between Lydia and Major Fenton, a retired officer with a perpetually ruddy face, who at once looked away and buried himself in the lemonade jug, and she did not miss the thin-lipped disapproval etched into Mrs. Beatrice Carstone's expression as she watched her husband's attentions to the widow. Beatrice, in her stiff lavender dress and with her hair pulled back to severity, was a woman who held her place in the world through iron will and propriety. She was not one to forgive impropriety, real or imagined. The talk around Miss Marple fluttered like birds in a hedge. Mrs. Price Ridley, with her sharp nose and sharper tongue, whispered to anyone within earshot that Lydia Harcourt had a past, of which she dared not speak too loudly. Mr. Clement, the vicar, attempted valiantly to steer conversation toward the upcoming church fete, but he was repeatedly dragged back into speculation about whether the Colonel's growing friendship with the widow was entirely suitable. Miss Marple listened, her needles clicking steadily, offering only the occasional mild remark about the roses or the weather. She had lived long enough to know that when people gossiped, they revealed far more of themselves than of the subject under discussion. The afternoon wore on, and the air grew heavier, the bright sunlight slipping behind slow-moving clouds. At 5:30, as the guests began drifting homeward with polite thanks and lingering glances, an extraordinary thing occurred. Colonel Carstone, who had stepped indoors to fetch a fresh decanter of sherry, did not return. After a few minutes, Mrs. Carston excused herself and went to look for him, when her cry rang through the open French doors, sharp and piercing. It silenced the garden as surely as a shot. They found him in the study. The Colonel lay slumped across his mahogany writing desk, his face pale, his body unnaturally still. The glass decanter stood beside him, half full, its stopper rolling on the carpet. Sherry had splashed across the blotter, mingling with the ink from a toppled pen. Dr. Haydock, summoned in haste from among the departing guests, bent over the body, his brows drawn, After a few moments he straightened, his face grave. "I'm afraid the Colonel is dead," he said quietly. "Very suddenly, though whether it was his heart or something more, I should not yet like to say." A hush fell upon the room. Mrs. Carstone's hand trembled against the door-frame, though her expression remained rigid. Mrs. Harcourt gave a little gasp and clutched her pearls. Major Fenton muttered something about shock and disgrace, and the vicar murmured a prayer. Miss Marple, standing unobtrusively near the window, looked not at the body, but at the faces around her. Each carried its own story: sorrow, fear, calculation, or perhaps relief. She had seen such things before, in drawing-rooms and cottages, in great houses and humble kitchens. Death always unmasked something in the living. And as she glanced again at the lifeless figure of Colonel Carston, distinguished soldier, respected villager, genial host, Miss Marple felt, with the calm certainty of long experience, that this was not the simple passing it seemed. Something had been set in motion that afternoon, beneath the roses and the polite chatter, and the consequences would ripple far beyond this room. She resumed her knitting with quiet hands. There would be much to observe in the days to come. The evening settled over the Grange. Those guests who had not already taken their leave drifted into the drive, speaking in voices made soft by shock. Dr. Haydock persuaded Mrs. Carston into the morning room and administered smelling salts with kindness. She endured them without a tremor, as if obedience itself might hold the world together. Miss Marple did not press forward. She kept to a low armchair near the window, her knitting folded, her gaze mild. From that inconspicuous perch she could see the corridor to the study and the French doors onto the lawn. People crossed those thresholds with the unconscious eloquence of the newly frightened. Inspector Craddock arrived with a sergeant and a constable, grave and tidy, the sort of man who apologizes to a chair before moving it. He conferred with Dr. Haydock, entered the study, and returned almost at once to address the company. "Ladies and gentlemen, I must ask those present after 5 o'clock to remain while we take statements. There is reason to doubt that the Colonel's death was entirely natural. We will not detain you longer than necessary." The assurance, though uncertain, steadied the air. Major Fenton demanded brandy and received it. He drank as if it were a duty. Mrs. Price Ridley announced to no one in particular that men who persisted in pepper paid for it sooner or later. Mrs. Lydia Harcourt, newly settled in the village and already a subject of opinion, stood by the mantel with her hands smoothing the silk at her waist. Miss Marple watched Hans. Mrs. Carstone's fingers lay clenched on the chair-arm, not in grief, but in restraint. Ellen the maid kept looking at the hall table where the decanter tray usually stood, as if its absence accused her. Major Fenton's index finger tapped the bowl of his glass in a parade-ground rhythm. Few eyes went to the study door. Craddock conducted interviews in the library. People went in ruffled and came out smoothed, as if confession were a clothes brush. When Miss Marple's turn came, he placed a chair for her and opened a neat notebook. "Your name, madam? Jane Marple, of St. Mary Mead. You were in the garden when the Colonel withdrew. I was. I ate a cucumber sandwich cut with a dull knife, and I admired the roses, which had been trained with a firm hand. The Colonel poured sherry and did not return." Craddock's pencil paused. "Tell me what you noticed on entering the study." "People," said Miss Marple. "They are always more enlightening than furniture." Dr. Haydock went straight to the desk. Mrs. Carston stopped upon the threshold and did not cross. Mrs. Harcourt's pearls slipped. She did not notice for 2 breaths. Major Fenton looked at the decanter before he looked at the Colonel, and the stopper had rolled under the knee-hole of the desk. Stoppers often fetch up against skirting boards. Rolling under suggests a push. You think the scene arranged? I think it resembles other scenes I have observed in drawing rooms and kitchens where appearances were contrived for one pair of eyes and allowed to mislead all the rest. Did anyone go into the study after the Colonel? I did not see anyone go in, but people do not always see old women, which is one of Providence's nicer economies. He allowed himself a brief smile. Enemies? In villages, said Miss Marple gently. We prefer irritations to enemies. Irritations held firmly do quite as much damage. He thanked her and requested unnecessarily that she remain available. Back in the morning room, gossip had gathered itself into theories. Apoplexy, Mrs. Price Ridley declared. I observed a dangerous flush about the ears last week at the butcher's. Lucius was sound as oak, Major Fenton stated. He could drink a regiment dry and wake refreshed. Poison is not a constitution, Lydia Harcourt murmured. Miss Marple's glance touched her face and moved on. We should not lend vocabulary to possibility, my dear. Words are like cheques. Once issued, they may be put to any use. Lydia coloured and then steadied. I hardly knew the Colonel. Hardly is a word people apply to acquaintances whom others have noticed, Miss Marple said. It may spare feelings which are not one's own. Mrs. Carston rose, a composed figure gathered into its own outline. Inspector, she said, I will speak with you now. The vicar accompanied her to the door. Ellen hovered close, as maids do when duty and curiosity pull in opposite directions. A small draught moved the curtains. Miss Marple lifted the sash an inch. Stale air breeds fancies, and fancies breed injustice. Gradually, permission to leave was granted. People went down the drive in quiet order, like a congregation after evensong. Miss Marple refused offers of conveyance and walked home in her little step. The village presented its usual face. Rooks crossing toward the beach. A child protesting bedtime. Mr. Badger at the grocer's drawing down his blind. Such continuities are what make villages bear calamity. They dilute it into habit. At her cottage, she put the kettle on, fed the cat, and took out the small notebook she used when thoughts preferred paper. She wrote 3 lines. Stopper under desk. Tray absent from hall table. Mrs. Carstone watched Mrs. Harcourt. She did not add a conclusion. Conclusions make poor seedlings. A knock came. Dr. Haydock, a shade older in the face. She poured tea without asking. I dislike what I know, he said. I shall dislike more by morning. Then we shall dislike it together, Miss Marple replied. It is economical to share distastes. He managed a smile. You observed something, Jane. Only the pull of a thread where all else lay smooth, she said. The study had the air of a scene tidied for a stranger, yet the sherry was fetched as if for a friend. If the Colonel meant to drink alone, he had a better chair in the library. If he meant to return, he did not. Be careful, he said. The village is always careful, Miss Marple answered. We carry our care in our heads rather than our hands. After he had gone, she drew the curtains and sat while the mantel clock counted the reasonable seconds of an unreasonable day. Colonel Carstone had been a man who liked things where he put them. He had now been moved, and everything else would shift a little to accommodate the vacancy. In that little shift, truth often hides. Miss Marple went to bed with the sober contentment of someone who has made no mistakes by speaking too soon. Dawn found St. Mary Mead pretending at normality. The milk boy rattled his cans. The baker's bell chimed. Talk went over the hedges like bees. Miss Marple, who regarded talk as both barometer and fuel, set out with her basket. At the lane's bend, Mrs. Hartnell accosted her with the benevolence of those who give information instead of soup. "So sudden, Miss Marple. They say the Colonel went from good to gone in a blink. My sister's husband had a cousin who did exactly that over rabbit pie. Indigestion is treacherous." "Indigestion pursues justice without a warrant," Miss Marple said. "Did you see Ellen this morning? The Carstones' Ellen? She came by the grocer at 8:30 for bicarbonate and stove blacking. I shouldn't have thought their grates so fussy in June." "Grates depend less on weather than on housekeepers," Miss Marple replied, and filed the blacking away. Humble things conceal humble marks. At the post office, Mrs. Weatherby presided over stamps and conscience. "We must be charitable," she told the queue, which is how people announce that they will not be. "The widow is a stranger." "Mrs. Lydia Harcourt," Miss Marple said mildly. "Any letters for her?" "2. One from London in a solicitor's hand, black-edged, one from France, and a registered parcel slip for the Grange to be signed by Mrs. Carston." She lowered her voice. "Inspector Craddock asked if the Colonel sent or received telegrams yesterday. He did not. Mr. Larch, the solicitor, wired that he will attend today." "Mr. Larch," Miss Marple repeated. "A will travels with a solicitor. Grief does not, though people expect it to." On the pavement she met Major Fenton, smooth at chin and rough about eyes. "Damned bad business," he said. "Carstone was a soldier. He ought not be made a spectacle." "Death is always theatrical to the living," she answered. "He tugged at his cuff. I had words with him last week. Club nonsense. Men bark. We don't bite. I observed during the war that sensible men saved their throats," she said. "He smelt of a brisk cologne he did not usually wear." By 10 she had put her chop in the larder and walked to the Grange. Constable Reeves nodded from the gate. Inspector Craddock met her in the hall with the wary gratitude of a man who has found an extra candle. "Dr. Haydock says we are not in the realm of Providence," he murmured. "We'll wait for analysis, but he spoke of something in the fortified wine line. Bitter almonds." "Bitter almonds are like compliments," Miss Marple said. "Often imagined. May I see the study? As near as we've kept it." Craddock pointed to a faint wet ring on the blotter. "A glass set down damp. The decanter shows no prints. Ellen says she always polishes." "Ellen purchased stove blacking this morning," Miss Marple murmured. "It shines cheap leather and is bad for evidence. Where was the sherry kept?" "In the hall on a tray." "And yet yesterday the decanter came here. Was it fetched by the Colonel or brought? Ellen says she saw him cross the hall with it." "Ellen says she saw," Miss Marple repeated. "And Mrs. Carston? She says he meant to toast the fate subscriptions by his desk because he had the list to hand." Miss Marple looked at the skirting board and into the knee-hole. The glass stopper lay on a card marked Evidence. Left to itself, a stopper fetches up against the skirting. Under suggests a push. There is a fresh scuff here. A foot reaching after something small. The Colonel's reach was long. Mrs. Carstone's would not be. Ellen's would be practised. Craddock grunted. Motive? The widow. Gossip enough to wallpaper the vicarage. The Major. Something at the club. Mrs. Carston. Restraint can break as loudly as rage. And money, Mr. Larch will enlighten us. Do not forget humble motives, she said. A place, a promise, a small insult. They found Mrs. Carstone in the morning room with the vicar, quiet as a pew. She agreed to see Mr. Larch and asked that Miss Marple take tea tomorrow. One keeps one's engagements, she said. Lydia Harcourt had sent word she would call. The note, copied by Ellen in careful capitals, lay on a tray. On the front step, Miss Marple noticed a faint smudge where a knee might have pressed. It had the mat of stove blacking. At home she ate, drank weak tea, and allowed memory to fetch a trifle. Colonel Carstone at the Fete Committee, politely overruling Ellen about flower vases. The housemaid had gone scarlet, then pale. Some do not forgive being made small in public. Rain came with a preference for windows. Miss Marple mended a cuff and considered Major Fenton's scent. Men do not change their polish without changing their purpose. She wrote, Major aftershave unusual. Lydia, letters London, France. Beatrice, calm as policy. Tray absent, Q plan, not impulse. At 4:30, the bell rang. Lydia Harcourt stood veiled, rain beading like coins. Her beauty had the carefulness of someone who cannot afford mistakes. "May I come in?" she asked. "I thought I should not go straight to Mrs. Carston." "Tea is less controversial," Miss Marple said, and made it. When cups were poured and seed cake set between them, she asked, "How long did you know the Colonel?" 6 weeks, Lydia said. "He was kind. People are not kind to widows unless they hope to profit." "And did you make any demands?" "Only to be considered decent." She hesitated. "Yesterday he said he meant to put a stop to talk. He would speak with his wife. I begged him not to. Silence is like an empty house. People move into it," Miss Marple said. "Did you write to London this morning?" Lydia's eyes widened, then accepted discovery. "To my cousin who manages my income, and to a friend in Paris who understands why a woman must leave a place." "It is seldom the village that prefers," said Miss Marple. "It is one person with a voice that borrows a village. We must find whose voice." "Do you think he was poisoned?" Lydia asked. "I think someone arranged for us to believe what helped them most," Miss Marple said. After Lydia left, Miss Marple looked at the rain-pitted garden and thought of the stopper under the desk, the decanter gone from its station, the smudge on stone. Arrangement begins with moving a small thing. Those who move small things well can, if unchecked, move people. She set her cup down, leaving the right kind of ring on the day. Inspector Craddock paid his second call on Miss Marple early the next morning, when bread smells persuasive and people are least prepared to lie. She had laid a plate of scones as if she had expected him. He suspected she had expected someone. He declined and produced his notebook. 2 developments, he said. Preliminary tests show cyanide likely in the sherry, and Mr. Larch has read the will to Mrs. Carstone in my presence. Everything goes to her. There's a small annuity to Ellen and £500 to a Captain Stephen Harcourt, brother to Mrs. Lydia's late husband. The Colonel added that bequest 6 days ago. It is payable only if Captain Harcourt surrenders a bill of sale that concerns the widow. Miss Marple poured tea and looked into the steam as if it were a photograph. A brother-in-law is a liminal thing, like a backstep, used more than noticed. A bill of sale attached to a woman is a sort of leash. If the Colonel meant to cut it, the widow gained most from his living. Craddock tapped his pencil. If the poison lay in the decanter, anyone could have done it after the fete. Ellen swears she polished the glass in the morning, filled it from the usual bottle, and set it on the hall tray. The Colonel fetched it himself. "Ellen swears," Miss Marple repeated, "as people do when they have done their duty, or fear they have not. The tray's absence from its table troubles me. To move a tray is to move a habit. One must be master or servant to dare it. Mrs. Carstone says it went to be replated. How sensible! Yet Ellen bought stove-blacking at 8:30. One does not polish boots in a house awaiting new plate unless a cloth has been used where it should not. I think of the smudge on the step." He wrote the word down. Men who listened to old women, Miss Marple had observed, wrote more and erased less. "We'll ask the silversmith," he said. "Meanwhile, the suspects, the widow and her reputation, the Major and his temper, the wife and her self-command." Do not forget small motives, she said. A place, a promise, a petty humiliation. He rose to go. I shall speak with Ellen again. After he left, Miss Marple put on her hat. Rain had washed the village into clean lines. Roofs shone like new slates. She went by the vicarage path to the grange, and knocked at the kitchen door, where truth prefers to enter. Ellen answered, eyes sleepless. Mrs. Carston says you may take tea tomorrow, miss. Tomorrow would be very nice, Miss Marple replied, but truth rarely waits. Might I borrow a cloth to rub a mark from my glove? Some black came off when I called yesterday. Ellen fetched a rag too quickly for thought. It bore the faint metallic sheen stove-blacking leaves when it dries. Miss Marple dabbed delicately and returned it. I confuse polishes, she said. I trust you keep them straight. The parlour maid does the tray, Ellen said. I see to the boots. Apron pockets are terrible places for dusters, Miss Marple said mildly. They leave shadows. Colour rose and fell in Ellen's face. We've had a time of it, of course. Sorrow is a dreadful housemaid. It leaves everything worse than it found it. She looked toward the study. Might I sit a moment? Old legs repeat old routes. Left alone for a breath, she noted the rug's slight ripple by the desk, as if a foot had dragged when something rolled. She knelt carefully and examined the floorboard edge. A crumb of greenish glass powder lay caught in the gap, no bigger than pinched salt. When she rose, Mrs. Carston stood in the doorway, composed and pale, as if composure itself were her work for the day. You are kind to come, Beatrice said. The house has not yet learned a softer voice. Grief must be told the rules, Miss Marple answered. Inspector Craddock said Mr. Larch attended you. He did. My husband made suitable provision. I shall not be driven from my home, Miss Marple. Habit is the strongest spine, Miss Marple said. I have known ladies who stood upright on habit alone. She turned as if to go, then paused with the vagueness that becomes a veil. One wonders about the sherry. It is a kind wine, generally. My husband took a glass every evening before letters, Beatrice said. He did yesterday, as he had always done. And yet yesterday many things were done as they had not always been. The tray, for instance. It is being replated. I always forget, Miss Marple said, whether one sends for replating after the silversmith writes, or whether the van calls whatever one does. I have only ever had alpaca plate. Beatrice's silence was a counter-move. Ellen will show you out, she said at last. Outside, Miss Marple walked at the speed of thought. At her gate, Major Fenton waited with an impatience that tried to look like courtesy. He raised his hat. I took the liberty. A word, Miss Marple. I've remembered something. Most of us do when the inspector begins to remember for us, she said. The colonel sent a boy with a note to me at 3. Asked me to bring over an old decanter he admired. Regency, heavy stopper. Said he wanted to compare cuts. I brought it at 4. He wasn't at liberty. Ellen took it. Indeed, Miss Marple said, whose heart took a tiny step and sat down again. And did you take it back? Late, after the afterwards. I asked for it. Ellen said it wasn't in the hall. This morning she sent it round. The stopper fits like a glove. Miss Marple looked at the hedge. How good of you to tell me, Major. He flushed, not displeased. You think little of me, I know, but I'd not see a lady wronged. We must first know which is the lady and which is the wrong, she said gently. When he had gone, she opened her notebook at the kitchen table and wrote, Cyanide, Will Favor's wife, gift to Ellen. Conditional bequest to Captain H 6 days ago. Tray replated but stove blacking in use. Smudge on step. Green glass powder near desk. 2 decanters in circulation. Ellen intermediary. Stopper pushed, not dropped. She listened to the clock and added, "Perhaps not in decanter, but in stopper groove or on rim. A small change to change a great deal." She closed the little book gently. Inspector Craddock telephoned at noon with a puzzle newly on its hinge. The silversmith in Much Benham confirmed he had no tray from the Grange. His van had not called in 3 weeks. "I do dislike to catch people out on domestic fibs," he said. "It makes me feel I have quarrelled with the furniture." "Furniture that moves itself is rarely innocent," Miss Marple replied. "Small untruths about objects often shield large truths about people. Are you seeing Ellen?" "In the kitchen within the hour. I have also sent for Captain Stephen Harcourt. The bequest will fetch him as a bone fetches a dog." Miss Marple replaced the receiver and considered the matter. A stopper could be dusted with more than blacking. A groove could be taught mischief with a toothpick. The greenish sparkle on the study floorboard returned to her inner eye with the insistence of a dropped stitch. At the Grange, the kitchen smelled of bread and contrition. Inspector Craddock had set his hat on the dresser. Ellen sat straight-backed, fists folded in her apron. Mrs. Carstone stood at the window. "We'll go one thing at a time, Ellen," Craddock said. "There is no tray at the silversmith's. Why did you say there was?" Ellen's eyes slid toward her mistress and back. "I thought there was to be. Mrs. Carstone said it was tired-looking." "I may have mentioned it ought to be seen to," Mrs. Carstone said coolly. "Is one to be charged with murder for wanting decent plate?" "Nobody is charging anyone," Craddock answered. "Yet the tray was not on its table." "Why?" Ellen swallowed. "It was spotted," she muttered. "Not by sherry, by what the doctor called up. It didn't seem fit for folks to see. I cleaned the place and put the tray aside. With blacking," Miss Marple offered gently. "One does dreadful things in haste to save face." Ellen looked at her with gratitude. "Only the edge, miss, where it showed." "And you wiped a stopper," Miss Marple said. "With what?" "A rag," Ellen whispered. "Just a flick. It looked smutty. The Major's decanter came in, and I set it by because the Colonel said he wished it. Then Mrs. Carstone called for the hall, and I muddled them for a minute, I did. I set the Major's on the tray, and the Colonel's on the sideboard. Then I put them right. Only the stoppers looked alike, and Mrs. Carstone turned. 'You careless girl.' 'Not careless,' Miss Marple said softly. 'Only human. It is in muddles that wickedness takes purchase or loses it.' Craddock leaned forward. 'Ellen, listen. Did you ever rub anything into a stopper groove? Any polish, any scent?' Ellen shook her head, tears bright. 'No, sir. I just flicked at the glass because it looked like marks.' Which decanter did the Colonel carry to the study? 'The one from the tray,' Ellen said. 'From the hall. And which stopper went with it?' 'I can't swear.' 'Quite,' Craddock said. 'You may have saved a rope with that muddle.' Afterwards, Beatrice Carstone dismissed Ellen to the yard, then sat. Her hands ungloved themselves. 'What is the shape of this foolishness, Inspector?' 'The shape,' Craddock said, "is that poison could have been applied to a stopper, so that a man pouring in his study received it while others, drinking elsewhere, did not. It would account for your spotless decanter and the ring on the blotter. It would also account for the green glass dust by the desk, if a sliver chipped when the stopper was pushed home too hard." "It is a theory," Beatrice said. "It is a habit," Miss Marple murmured. "The Colonel took sherry at his desk. Somebody knew that habit and used it. People who live in the house know such things best." Beatrice's chin lifted. "If you mean me, say so." "I rarely mean what can be heard," Miss Marple answered. "I prefer what can be understood." There was a commotion in the hall. A man entered with London on his boots, and a quarrelsome face indeed. "Stephen Harcourt," he announced. "I have come for my sister-in-law's sake. Also, there is the small matter of £500. Captain Harcourt, Craddock said. You will give me your time. You will have what you can take, Harcourt said, but he sat when Mrs. Carston's gaze invited him no other choice. Miss Marple studied him, as she had once studied a cockerel in a pen of older birds. All noise until someone pecked, gloves frayed cuff, tobacco stain on the middle finger, signs of a man counting cigarettes rather than smoking them. You had a bill of sale regarding Mrs. Lydia Harcourt, Miss Marple said. Harcourt's mouth went hard. She borrowed. People do, Miss Marple agreed. Sometimes others buy such bills because they prefer gratitude to interest. 6 days ago the Colonel altered his will. He meant to buy me off, Harcourt said. It was that, or I put it about, that his friendship for Lydia was not entirely charitable. Blackmail is such an impatient word, Miss Marple murmured. Craddock's pencil whispered, Where were you yesterday afternoon? In town, with 2 men who will swear to it for a shilling and a drink. I took the late train. Ask your porter. We shall, Craddock said. Meanwhile, you will produce the bill. I will produce what is paid for, Harcourt retorted. Mrs. Carston rose. You will produce anything the inspector asks for in my house, she said, and Miss Marple heard the iron without the velvet. Harcourt's eyes narrowed. Ah, the lady of the house. The only lady here, Beatrice said. He laughed. We shall see. When he had gone to the library with Craddock, Miss Marple looked at Beatrice's profile. You do not like to be laughed at, she said. No, Beatrice answered, and I do not like men who think women are ledgers. Many men do, Miss Marple said. She lifted her bag. And I will leave you to your dignity. Outside the rain had softened to a mist that made the village smaller. Miss Marple walked home, her mind full of stoppers and trays, of lies told to protect respectability, and lies told to collect it. Somewhere among those small movements, a hand had found the right pressure, and somewhere else she was certain that hand would move again if not watched. She put the kettle on, opened her notebook, and wrote one more line. Wrong stopper with right decanter equals private exposure and public safety. For one man, ruin for another. The trick lies in choosing who first drinks. Inspector Craddock returned to the Grange that afternoon with the perseverance of a man who suspects the truth is hiding in a tidy room. Miss Marple, having received Mrs. Carston's stiff invitation for tea, arrived 5 minutes early and was shown into the morning room where the teacups were aligned with military obedience. The rain had left the garden rinsed and sparkling. Even sorrow looked polished through the panes. Beatrice Carston poured with a hand that did not tremble. You find the village restless, Miss Marple. Villages are like hens, Miss Marple said, settling into a chintz chair. Restlessness is their way of thinking. It becomes productive if one scatters the right grain. She glanced at the sideboard. A decanter stood there, Regency cut, heavy stopper, its glass bright as conscience. What a handsome piece! It is Major Fenton's, Beatrice said. Returned this morning. Ellen washed it. Washing is a remedy universally applied, Miss Marple murmured. She rose for a closer look, the better to admire the cut. A minute whitish nick marred the inner lip, scarcely the breadth of a pin. One shivers for the craftsman and remembers we all chip under pressure. Beatrice's mouth thinned. I cannot pretend to understand these men with their appetites and collections. Lucius liked objects he could hold and regulate. Miss Marple returned to her chair. One sees such preferences in tidy nursery boys. Order promises a world without surprises. Murder is a dreadful correction. She accepted her tea. Does Ellen manage? Ellen manages what she is told, Beatrice answered. I have sent the parlour-maid to her mother. Fewer hands make fewer muddles. Or fewer witnesses. Miss Marple said so kindly that the sting looked like sympathy. She sipped, then set down her cup to study a small fern in the window. Your conservatory is admirable. I noticed a bay and a laurel last week. Beatrice's eyes flickered. The laurel was cut back. It had gone rank. It often does, Miss Marple agreed. Like gossip, laurel grows where the air is still. She turned as Craddock entered, apologetic as if he had interrupted his own thoughts. I won't intrude. Mrs. Carston, I must speak with Ellen again, that's all. Captain Harcourt's alibi looks stout. Porter, ticket, a sorry landlady in Bloomsbury, who says he owed her 3 weeks' rent and the truth. He came down on the late train. He came down to collect, Beatrice said. That too, Craddock allowed. Mr. Larch confirms the addendum regarding the bequest. He says the Colonel had a meeting with him 6 days ago and seemed in excellent spirits. Mentioned setting 1 or 2 matters straight. Setting straight, Miss Marple repeated, a phrase men use when they mean to tidy other people. It excites resistance in those who have lived untidily. She stood. If Mrs. Carstone will excuse me, I should like to look at the hall a moment. They moved together. The tray's accustomed place on the table greeted Miss Marple like an old friend returned from a story that had not been true. Its surface was flawless to the eye and dishonest to the finger. The drag of blacking sat invisible where silver should have been merely clean. "Thank you," Miss Marple said to no one and everyone. "I am fond of objects that keep confessions after people have finished." Craddock cleared his throat. "I've a man dusting both decanters and the stoppers separately. If the poison sat on a groove, we may catch what clung." "One always hopes," Miss Marple said, "although I have known thorough women to rinse grooves like consciences." He smiled faintly and went to find Ellen. Miss Marple, left with Beatrice, admired a small oil painting of a regiment crossing a shallow river. "Lucius looked well on a horse," Beatrice said unexpectedly. "He liked the noise of hooves. I liked sleep. We made a bargain for many years. He rode early. I did not complain of boots in the passage. People imagine marriages are made of kiss and quarrel. They are made of bargains. And the last bargain?" Miss Marple asked gently. "The last bargain," Beatrice said, "was that he would not make me ridiculous." The bell in the hall rang twice, a constable's brisk summons. Craddock's voice came down the corridor, urgent as weather. Miss Marple and Beatrice met him at the doorway. "There's been trouble," he said. "At the Blue Boar. Captain Harcourt's taken ill, very ill. He collapsed in the parlour after asking for hot water for his pocket flask. Landlord says he poured a finger, drank and went over. There's a smell. Bitter almonds," Miss Marple said. So quietly the words were almost thoughtful. How economical of someone to repeat a method already understood by the village. Beatrice's face did not change, but her hand tightened on the doorframe. "Suicide," she said. Craddock shook his head. "Maybe." But a note turned up in his pocket. 2 lines. "I cannot face ruin. S.H. It's written on paper, headed The Grange." Beatrice's self-command cracked enough to show the steel beneath. "Inspector, if you suggest—" "I suggest nothing," Craddock said. "I observe. The Blue Boar is cordoned. Dr. Haydock is with him. He lives for the moment. May I go?" Miss Marple asked. "You may do what you like," Craddock said with uncharacteristic fervour. "For my part, I will find who keeps laurel in their pocket and grace on their tongue." "Reeves," he called, and the constable appeared. "No one leaves this house without my say. Mrs. Carstone, I must ask you to remain. Miss Marple, if you'll meet me at the Blue Boar, I will not refuse your eyes." She walked briskly for an old lady, her mind travelling a half-step ahead. The Blue Boar's parlour smelled of beer and fear. Harcourt lay on the settle, grey as old pewter, Haydock working briskly over him with the competent anger of a man tired of seeing ordinary rooms converted into theatres of cruelty. "Will he live?" Miss Marple asked. "If he wished to, I'd be more sanguine," Haydock said. "As it is, we have a chance. He got less of it than Carston, spat some out, perhaps. Fool's flask!" Miss Marple looked at the flask on the table, uncapped, its silver stained at the rim. A folded paper lay beside it, the Grange engraved at the top. She did not touch, only read the 2 lines as if they were a scrap of sermon blown against the hedge. The hand was cramped and too regular for panic. Craddock came in with the landlord at his heels. "Reeves holds the bar," he said. "No one in or out who matters." He glanced at the paper and grimaced. "The widow is at the counter demanding news. She says Harcourt threatened to make trouble." "Trouble is a profession with some men," Miss Marple said, "but trouble that borrows a lady's stationery learns etiquette from the wrong house. Beatrice Carstone would never leave this much space at the margin. She is a woman of narrow allowances." Craddock stared, then looked again. "You and your margins, Miss Marple." "People write themselves into their paper," she said. "I observe that who wrote this learned to copy headings from bills. He did not notice that quality stationery invites economy of words near the edges. Sloppiness is democratic." She crossed to the hearth. A droplet had fallen there and hissed to dullness, leaving a tiny dark bead. Someone poured in a hurry. Perhaps the hand shook less from fear than from habit. "Whose habit?" Craddock asked. "Major Fenton uses a heavy hand for alcohol," Miss Marple said. "But he is not a man for notes. Captain Harcourt is a man for notes when they bring money, not when they deny it. Lydia Harcourt is a woman accustomed to being written about, not to writing apologies. Mrs. Carstone uses rules as other women use ribbons." She looked at the flask. "Tell me, Inspector, who had opportunity to lend a note, to supply a flask, to be believed? I think of intermediaries, servants, innkeepers, those who move unnoticed between one person's pride and another's need." The landlord shifted. "Beg pardon, ma'am. The flask was the captain's own." "Of course," Miss Marple said kindly. "But flasks, like stoppers, are promiscuous. They visit pockets when their owners are not present. A barmaid wipes, an errand boy fetches water, a helpful soul adds a cordial. Murder in villages is a cooperative craft, unless directed by a very tidy mind." Harcourt stirred and made a sound between plea and curse. Haydock leaned in. "He'll speak if we keep him," he muttered. Craddock lowered his voice. If someone tried to silence him, it was because the will's condition gave him leverage, either to sell the paper dear, or to threaten the widow, or the wife. "Or," Miss Marple said, "because his muddle would unmake someone else's arrangement. Men like Captain Harcourt are useful so long as they remain untidy. When they begin to tidy others, they must be put back into the drawer." She looked toward the door, where Lydia's pale face hovered beyond Reeves's shoulder. "I should like a quiet word with Mrs. Harcourt when you have done." Craddock nodded and went to manage the passage. Miss Marple sat a moment and studied the note again without touching it. The capital S coughed at the top as if begun twice. The H came down too hard, blunting the stroke. Someone had practised on a scrap, then written with the wrong pen. A second droplet on the hearth had kissed a grain of soot and eaten it to a hole the size of a pinhead. "2 kisses," Miss Marple said softly, "and not much love." She rose as Lydia was shown in, her veil trembling like breath. "Is he?" Lydia faltered. "Alive," Miss Marple said. "Alive men often think better than dead ones, my dear. Sometimes they even tell the truth by accident." She led her a pace aside. Captain Harcourt meant to sell your piece twice. Once to the Colonel, once to fear. Someone disliked bargaining. Mrs. Carston? Lydia whispered. Miss Marple looked past her to where Craddock spoke with the landlord. Do not instruct me in names, she said, and the kindness in her voice made the rebuke gentle. People who have disciplined themselves for years do not generally choose chaos when order will serve. We must look for the person to whom muddle is a tool and polish a disguise. We must look, in short, for someone who cleans too hard. Inspector Craddock left the Blue Boar with Miss Marple beside him, and Lydia Harcourt a few paces behind. The green shone after rain. Washed light makes stains stand out. You said we must look for someone who cleans too hard, Craddock murmured. For a mind that makes cleanliness a cover, Miss Marple replied. Such minds tolerate only the muddle they arrange. Lydia stopped. If Stephen dies, they will say, They will say what fills a teacup, Miss Marple said. Give them better. What did he threaten? He kept a paper I signed years ago, my husband's name on a bill for passage. Stephen urged it. I was desperate. He claimed the Colonel meant to buy it. Yesterday Stephen sent word to meet at 6 at the Blue Boar. He never came. Craddock noted this, sent Lydia home with a constable, and parted from Miss Marple at the lane. She changed her shoes, fed the cat, and called at the vicarage. Griselda Clement poured coffee. The vicar advised charity. Miss Marple took information and went on. Major Fenton sat in the club reading room, upright in a low chair. He rose, unwillingly polite. You lent the Colonel a decanter. He admired it, Fenton said. One doesn't refuse a gentleman, even if one quarrelled. Did you call last night? For 5 minutes, he admitted. I waited in the hall. Ellen fetched hot water. Vile weather. Your flask? I don't drink from flasks in ladies' houses, he muttered. That is not the same as never having one, Miss Marple said, and left him with his dignity. At the Grange, Reeves reported Ellen in the laundry. Craddock was with Mrs. Carston. Beatrice received Miss Marple in a sitting-room arranged like a list. She poured tea precisely. I dislike my servants harried. Time is dear to servants, Miss Marple said. Truth is dearer. She set down her cup. What was the bargain before the last? Beatrice frowned. What bargain? You told me the last was not to be made ridiculous. Before that, Ellen? Lucius wished to dismiss her after she contradicted him at the fete committee. I refused. He punished by silence. Punished by silence. And a cold justice invites fires elsewhere, Miss Marple murmured. Did your husband share sherry at his desk? With no one. Then the poison was intended for him alone. Ellen entered with a basket of napery, stiffened at sight of Miss Marple, and would have withdrawn. Beatrice kept her with a look. Ellen, Miss Marple said gently, you fetched hot water last night. For the Major, Ellen said. He waited in the hall. I took a jug and a clean glass to the little study off the conservatory. The Colonel used to smoke there, and a flask. He left one on the side table. I wiped the lip. It looked greasy. Craddock came in and heard enough. When did Captain Harcourt get water? This morning, Ellen said. He knocked at the back door. I gave him some from the pantry jug. Craddock dismissed her and turned to Miss Marple. What does this give us? A sequence, she said. Last night, a flask in the little study, hot water, a glass. This morning, a thirsty caller. Between those errands, a house where order rules, and a maid who polishes what offends her eye. Beatrice's hands tightened. If you accuse Ellen, she is an instrument, Miss Marple said. The tune is another's. Instruments are chosen for tone. Ellen's tone is spotless. Craddock waited for a name. Miss Marple did not supply one. Who could move about after the constable left? Who knew the Colonel's habit of sherry at his desk, and the inn's habit of lending boiling water? Who wrote on Grange paper and ignored its margins? You think the note a forgery? Beatrice asked. Not yours. You are a woman of narrow allowances, even on paper. The landlord says the captain produced the note himself, Craddock said. The barmaid swears the flask was his. Ownership and handling differ, Miss Marple replied. A stopper belongs to one decanter and visits another. A flask is hospitable. Keys? She asked Beatrice. Ellen holds the little study key, Beatrice said. I hold the rest. Lucius's desk key was in his pocket. Miss Marple rose. Inspector, ask Major Fenton to show you his lighter. If newly filled, the wheel may be stained. Ask also where he bought his aftershave, and when. Scent? Continuity. Men change their scent when they wish to be a different story in other people's heads. Craddock went. Miss Marple turned to Beatrice. One more thing. Did the Colonel speak of cutting laurels 6 days ago? Yes, Beatrice said. It had gone rank. Those who plan like straight stems, those who plot like thickets, Miss Marple said, and took her leave. Reeves intercepted her with the porter's sworn times. The late train bore Captain Harcourt, as claimed. At 9, Craddock telephoned. Harcourt will live. He says he received a letter at noon on blue bore paper, inviting him back at 6 to settle matters. The hand matches the note found in his pocket, but the paper is different. Too many papers, Miss Marple said. The greedy often write twice. She opened her notebook and drew 3 circles. Desk, little study, blue bore. Between them she wrote, water, glass, flask, tray, stopper, note. Under that, hand that cleans, hand that copies, hand that chooses who first drinks. Before sleeping, she wrote 3 invitations in her small, steady hand. One to Major Fenton for a quiet word over seed cake. One to Lydia Harcourt for a little counsel about journeys and luggage. And one to Beatrice Carston. A neighbour's call. If convenient, she added a separate message for Ellen, to be carried by the vicar's boy. Could you bring me your best blacking rag? My boots are a disgrace. Competent people are happiest when asked to help. They seldom notice danger when it looks like duty. Miss Marple sealed the envelopes, weighed them with a small china bird, and set her alarm for an hour earlier than custom. The village would wake to errands, and errands like threads show their pattern when drawn. Night folded the village. Somewhere a match rasped. A man lit a cigarette under a dripping hedge. Miss Marple blew out her lamp and let the quiet take its proper level, like a teacup set exactly on its saucer. Tomorrow would require invitations, and careful listening to what the Polish leaves behind. She lay down, smiling faintly. For murderers dislike being invited. They must either come and pretend at manners, or refuse and confess by absence. Either way, revealing. The morning of Miss Marple's invitations dawned bright, the air sweetened by the storm's passing. Villages after rain are always restless, as if secrets loosen with the damp. By 10 o'clock her small cottage saw the first knock. Major Fenton, punctual as soldiers must be. He removed his hat with exaggerated deference and seated himself where she directed. The chair angled so his broad back caught the sun through the window. He smelled again of that sharp cologne, an effortful fragrance that tried to replace tobacco and brandy. Miss Marple set out seed cake and spoke of gardening, allowing silence to bloom before asking, "You were at the Grange the evening before the Colonel died?" Fenton cleared his throat. For a moment, he asked to see my decanter, admired it. Ellen took it in. I went no further, and after his death, I returned it when I could. A decent piece. He shifted, his finger tapping the armrest in the same martial rhythm she had once noticed. You do not suspect me, Miss Marple. I rarely suspect, she said gently. I observe, and I observed you used a new aftershave this week. Soldiers do not change scents unless they mean to alter more than smell. He flushed. I wish to forget a quarrel. He and I, yes, we argued, but I would not poison. Cowards work. She nodded, filing the rhythm of his denial into her mind. When he left, Lydia Harcourt arrived, veiled and pale, her hands restless with the handle of her bag. Miss Marple offered her tea and a slice of sponge. Mrs. Harcourt, she began softly, people have spoken of you. That cannot be helped. But you know the Colonel intended to help you, to purchase your brother-in-law's claim. Lydia's eyes shone with sudden tears. Yes, he told me so the day before. I begged him not to. It would have set tongues wagging more than ever. But he insisted. And now Stephen! She broke off, shuddering. Stephen still breathes, Miss Marple said, but someone preferred him silent. Did you see him yesterday morning? No, only a note under my door, asking me to call at the Blue Boar later. I thought it a trap. I burned it. Miss Marple's gaze was steady. It is remarkable how paper persists, even when people believe it destroyed. She let the words rest before turning the talk to safer topics. Journeys, Paris, the trials of women alone. When Lydia departed, the faint scent of lavender remained, clinging to the air like regret. Beatrice Carston arrived last, upright and contained, her hat severe. Miss Marple received her with the courtesy of one sovereign to another. "You honour me with your call," Miss Marple said. "Lucius often said," Beatrice replied, "that neighbours must show discipline. Discipline is what we have left." Miss Marple poured tea. "And order, perhaps. I wondered, Mrs. Carstone, about the tray. Ellen spoke of polishing it. But you said it was to be replated. A small contradiction, no doubt." "Ellen is excitable," Beatrice said. "I said it needed it, not that it had gone." Miss Marple inclined her head. "I have sometimes known servants to lie for their mistress, and mistresses to lie for their servants. Which it is, one must judge by character." Beatrice's gaze was cool. "You think Ellen killed him? I think Ellen polished what another soiled. The question is, whose hand trusted her to do so?" Beatrice's lips tightened. Lucius was not easy, but he was mine. I would not poison what was mine. Miss Marple's smile was small and sad. Possession can be fiercer than love, sometimes fiercer than hate. Before Beatrice left, Inspector Craddock arrived, bringing with him the latest intelligence. Captain Harcourt, revived, had sworn the letter that summoned him to the Blue Boar was not in his own hand, though the note found in his pocket appeared to be. "He insists," Craddock said grimly, "that someone planted it. He blames Major Fenton." "Fenton does not write with such cramped precision," Miss Marple said. "He marches across a page as across a field. No, this hand is tidy, disciplined, parsimonious. It belongs to someone who measures margins and trims laurel." Craddock stared. "Mrs. Carston." "Not so fast, Inspector," Miss Marple said. "We must not confuse capacity with action. A tidy hand may write a false note, but only if it suits the heart that guides it. The heart may be hers, or another's who mimics her discipline. At that moment Ellen appeared at the door, breathless. "Please, miss, the Major. He's called at the Grange, demanding to speak with mistress. Says he has proof the widow set the captain up." Miss Marple rose, her knitting bag already in her hand. "Then we must go at once. Proof, in such cases, is often the untidiest thing of all." She and Craddock walked quickly to the Grange, the constable keeping pace. They entered the drawing-room to find Major Fenton flushed and loud, Beatrice standing tall by the fireplace, and Lydia shrinking near the door. On the table lay a folded sheet of paper, Blue Boar letterhead, I found this in her room," Fenton cried, pointing at Lydia. "Her hand, her plan! She lured her own brother-in-law to ruin." Lydia shook her head wildly. "No, that is not mine." Miss Marple bent, her fingers brushing the page without taking it. The hand was too careful, the margins too exact. She looked at Beatrice Carston, who did not flinch, then at Fenton, whose pulse throbbed like a drum. "It is very strange," Miss Marple said softly, "how tidy forgeries can be, and how much they reveal about the forger's mind." The room fell silent but for the ticking clock. The threads had tightened, and Miss Marple knew the pattern was nearly complete. Soon the hand that polished too hard, wrote too neatly, and arranged too carefully would have no more room to hide. The silence in the drawing-room pressed like damp wool. Major Fenton's fist remained on the table, his jaw set in grim triumph. Lydia Harcourt, pale and stricken, clutched at her veil as though it might shield her from accusation. Beatrice Carston stood motionless, her composure carved from something harder than grief. Her gaze not at the paper, but at the man who had produced it. Inspector Craddock's eyes darted between them, restless, uncertain, while Miss Marple lowered herself into a chair, with the unhurried air of one who knew time would bend to her. She took up her spectacles, examined the letter again without touching more than its edge, and spoke with the mild tone that had so often dismantled certainty in others. "This paper proclaims too much. Villagers are rarely so obliging as to leave their guilt in neat margins." Fenton barked a laugh without humour. "You'd defend her? It's plain as day. She lured her brother-in-law to that inn and tried to finish him." "Plainness," Miss Marple observed, "is very often a mask. True things are seldom plain until one knows them entirely." She tilted her head and added, "Tell me, Major, how came this paper into your possession?" He faltered slightly. "I found it among her things, hidden." "Indeed?" Miss Marple's knitting bag rested in her lap, her fingers idle. "And how did you come to be in her room, Major? Lodgings are private, even in grief." The question hung sharp in the air. Fenton's flush deepened. "I had reason. The inspector needed evidence. I thought it my duty to search." Craddock frowned. "That was no instruction of mine, Major." Beatrice's voice cut through with chilling clarity. "You trespassed in a woman's room." "Very honourable," Fenton bristled. "I do what must be done. Better to be harsh than blind. That paper condemns her." Miss Marple smoothed her skirt and regarded him with steady patience. "I have lived long enough to know handwriting bears more than words. It bears character. This hand here is disciplined, economical, with each letter precisely formed, each line measured. It is the hand of someone accustomed to control, to rules, to balance. Forgive me, Major, but your writing is too hurried, too heavy. You press with force, not with care. This tidy imitation belongs not to you." Fenton's protest rose, then faltered into silence. All eyes shifted to Beatrice Carstone, who had not moved. She stood still as stone, her face unreadable, her hands clasped before her. Lydia whispered hoarsely, "It wasn't me. I burned the note I received, I swear it." Craddock interjected, his voice rough. "Mrs. Carston, will you account for this? Did you write this note?" Beatrice met his gaze without blinking. "I did not. The denial was simple, stark, yet it carried no shock, no outrage, only the coolness of someone who would neither plead nor embellish." Miss Marple leaned forward slightly. "I wonder, Mrs. Carstone, how often you have copied your husband's correspondence. A tidy house usually produces tidy letters. He was not a man for order. His hand was untidy, bold. Yours, I think, is another matter. That difference is telling." For the first time, a flicker crossed Beatrice's expression, a twitch at the corner of her mouth. It was gone at once, but Miss Marple had seen it. Craddock caught it too and stepped nearer. "If you didn't write it, who did?" "Ellen. She copies when asked, but this looks beyond her skill." "Ellen's hand," Miss Marple said, "is too round, too laborious. She has the script of one who writes seldom, and always under instruction. This hand, Inspector, belongs to someone accustomed to economy in everything, even strokes of a pen, and it is accompanied by something else. Forgery, when tidy, is too tidy. Real desperation scrawls, it does not measure. Whoever wrote this wished not merely to deceive, but to stage the deception for our eyes." Fenton shifted uneasily, his earlier certainty ebbing. "Then what do you say, Miss Marple? That the widow is innocent? That Beatrice here forged it herself? To what end?" Miss Marple's gaze moved slowly between them. "I do not yet say who, Major, but I say this. Both notes cannot be genuine. One was placed under Mrs. Harcourt's door, another in Captain Harcourt's pocket. One burned, one produced. Duplication is rarely coincidence. It is arrangement, and arrangement belongs to a mind that dislikes chance." The grandfather clock chimed, each strike drawing the tension tighter. Lydia, trembling, spoke again. "Please, you must believe me. I had no part. I wanted only peace. Stephen was cruel, but I would never—" Her words dissolved into sobs. Beatrice's voice emerged, low and controlled. "Inspector, this is intolerable. My house is turned into a stage for theatrics." "Because," Miss Marple said gently, "it has been made one. Murder thrives on appearances. A tray moved, a stopper polished, a note placed where eyes would find it. All tidying, all arranging. Yet murder, Mrs. Carston, is not tidy in the end. It leaves its mark even where polish has rubbed hardest." Craddock turned sharply. "What mark?" Miss Marple looked at Ellen, who had been hovering in the doorway, silent, anxious. "The blacking rag," she said softly. "You will find fibres of it in the groove of the stopper." Ellen wiped where she was told, not knowing what she wiped away. But particles cling, even under polish. The colour drained from Beatrice's face, though she held her pose. "Ellen is careless. She muddled the decanters. She must have transferred what you speak of." "Ah," Miss Marple said kindly, "but Ellen muddles. She does not plan. A muddle explains confusion. It does not explain 2 notes, 2 invitations, 2 attempts. That is a mind not muddling, but orchestrating." Craddock's jaw tightened. He looked from Beatrice to the paper, from the paper to Lydia. "We'll need to test that stopper again, and the rag. I'll send them to London if I must." Miss Marple rose with quiet dignity, gathering her knitting bag. "Do so, Inspector. But remember, evidence speaks slowly. Human nature speaks faster if one listens. We are nearly there. The pattern is woven. Only one thread remains to be drawn." The tension in the room trembled, like a rope pulled taut, ready to snap. Major Fenton glared. Lydia wept silently, and Beatrice stood tall, her silence heavier than any protest. Miss Marple moved toward the door, her calm presence disarming, her words lingering like the faint echo of a bell. "The truth, Inspector, is not far. It sits in this very room, neat and polished, waiting to be noticed." Inspector Craddock insisted the room remain sealed until he had weighed every angle. The blue bore forgery, the polished stopper, the muddled tray, all were pieces, but he lacked the hand that stitched them. Miss Marple, with her quiet air, simply folded her spectacles and slipped them into her bag. She had seen enough, though she knew that in such matters it was not seeing that mattered, but persuading others to look. Ellen was summoned again, trembling beneath Beatrice's cold eye. Craddock questioned her with firmness. "When you cleaned the decanter, Ellen, did anyone tell you to do so? Or did you act on your own?" Ellen glanced from her mistress to Miss Marple. Mrs. Carston said the hall must be spotless. She didn't say the decanter, sir, but I thought, well, the Colonel was particular. I wanted no shame. Did you notice the stopper had been handled? Ellen hesitated. There was a stickiness, sir. Sharp smell. Not sherry. But I wiped it quick. Miss Marple interjected softly. And when you wiped, you used the rag you'd blacked boots with, did you not? Because it was near to hand. Ellen's eyes widened. Yes, miss. It were foolish. It was human, Miss Marple said kindly. But it tells us more than you think. Craddock made notes, his pencil biting deep into the page. Fenton paced restlessly, his heavy tread betraying the unease behind his bluster. Lydia Harcourt sat small and pale, her veil shadowing eyes that had lost hope of being believed, and Beatrice Carstone remained motionless, her composure so deliberate it had become its own kind of confession. Miss Marple turned her gaze to the fire, speaking as if only to herself. Poison on a stopper, wiped by a maid, shifted from one decanter to another in a muddle. That could happen once by chance, but it does not happen twice at the Blue Boar without arrangement, and arrangement is the enemy of chance. Craddock looked up sharply. You mean Harcourt's poisoning and the Colonel's are linked? Of course, Miss Marple said gently. They are the same tune, played on different instruments. Someone wished first to silence the Colonel, then to silence the man who might spoil the effect of that silence. Both were achieved by means that depend on tidiness. Placing, polishing, arranging. A stopper here, a flask there, a note in the pocket. Each small action seemed innocent. Together they form design. Fenton stopped pacing. Then say it plain, Miss Marple. Who? She studied him. You are impatient, Major. Impatience is rarely the companion of cunning. Your temper may lead you to quarrels, but it does not lead you to neat margins and carefully trimmed laurel, nor do you forge notes with such tidy hands. His face darkened, but he said nothing. Miss Marple turned slowly to Lydia. And you, my dear, are careless in despair, but never orderly. You burn notes in fright, but you do not copy them with precision. You are too frightened of discovery to risk invention. It was never you. Lydia pressed her hands together, tears slipping free. Finally, Miss Marple looked at Beatrice Carston, which leaves only one whose habits match the crime, a woman who endures silently, who bargains rather than quarrels, who trims laurel and scolds muddle, who knows her husband's every routine, his glass of sherry, his seat at the desk, his way of dismissing servants, who would not shout or strike or shame, but would quietly arrange the world so that no one could make her ridiculous. Beatrice's lips parted, but no denial came. Only silence, hard and perfect. Craddock stepped forward. Mrs. Carston, did you poison the Colonel? She looked at him with unflinching eyes. He meant to humiliate me, to throw away our life together for a woman he had known 6 weeks, to pay off her blackguard of a brother-in-law with money that was mine as much as his. He would have made me a laughing-stock in my own house. I could not permit it. Her words were low, measured, each one cut like glass. And so, Miss Marple said softly, you turned his habits into your weapon. A stopper dusted, a decanter moved, a study chosen because it was his ritual place. And when Stephen Harcourt threatened the neatness of your arrangement, you repeated the method, slipping poison where it would seem his own weakness, adding a forged note to seal the story. It was not rage, but tidiness that guided you. Beatrice drew herself upright, her chin high. I did what was necessary. He would have ruined us all. Craddock signalled to the constable, his voice grave. Mrs. Carston, I must place you under arrest for the murder of Colonel Lucius Carston, and the attempted murder of Captain Stephen Harcourt. Ellen gasped, dropping her basket of linen, while Lydia covered her face and wept. Major Fenton muttered something under his breath and turned away. Beatrice extended her wrists calmly, as if offering them were the last act of discipline she could perform. Miss Marple gathered her knitting, her expression neither triumphant nor shocked, but sorrowful. "It is always the same," she murmured. "Pride hides itself in order, and order becomes a prison. One does not notice the cracks until someone dies." As the inspector led Beatrice from the room, the clock struck once, echoing through the house. The sound seemed to linger, a solemn toll for a man who had died twice, once in his study, and once again in the truth that had finally been spoken aloud. Miss Marple smoothed her skirt, replaced her spectacles, and rose. She had no need to remain longer. Human nature in all its tidy cruelties had revealed itself. There was nothing more to see. The constable shut the front door of the Grange with a sound like a lid, and the room exhaled as though a long breath had been held too long. Inspector Craddock stood with his hat in his hands, not putting it on, as if to wear it would suggest his thinking was complete. Ellen gathered the fallen napery into small, shamefaced armfuls. Major Fenton busied himself at the hearth, pushing a log with unnecessary energy, while Lydia Harcourt sat on the edge of a chair, fingers interlaced, her eyes fixed not on any person, but on the tray table, as if that polished rectangle might still tell the truth that people would not. Miss Marple, who had been quiet during the arrest, chose a chair with a view of all their faces. She had learned long ago that secrets try to escape through expressions when words run out. "Tea," she said, and the single syllable steadied the air. Ellen brought the tray, as if it might accuse her. Miss Marple poured for Lydia first, then set a cup beside the inspector, and offered one to the Major, who declined with a gruff shake. The four of them listened to the fire's sensible noises, until Miss Marple added, with the kindly finality of someone smoothing a quilt, "We shall all be more useful when we have finished this cup." Craddock cleared his voice. "I will send a man to the Blue Boar to sit with Harcourt. If he rallies, we shall take a full statement. London will confirm what we already know in our bones about the stopper and the rag. But it was your eyes that set the pattern, Miss Marple." "My eyes are only a habit," she said. "One looks until pride stops explaining and vanity begins to confess." Mrs. Carstone allowed no muddle, and so the muddles spoke. Major Fenton's gruffness had lost its armour. "What of me, Inspector? I went poking where I shouldn't. If there's to be a rebuke, best deliver it now." "There is to be restraint," Craddock answered. "You will make no pronouncements in the club. You will speak of the Colonel with respect, and of Mrs. Carstone not at all." Fenton coloured, then nodded. "I can do that." After a moment, softer. "She was formidable. I did not like her, but I cannot help pitying her. Duty without kindness is a hard saddle." "Hard saddles throw even good riders," Miss Marple said. "We needn't pity the hardness so much as the choices that made it necessary." Lydia set down her cup with both hands, as though returning a borrowed thing. "Am I to live here after this? I do not think I can walk past that house again. People will say I broke a marriage merely by existing." "People will say what fills an afternoon," Miss Marple replied. "You must plan for your mornings. There is a cottage in Much Benham that lets cheaply to ladies who mind their curtains and pay on the first. I shall write the address. Captain Harcourt's paper will be recovered. Mr. Larch can attend to the legalities. You will be nobody there, which is the kindest mask." Lydia's eyes brimmed. "You are very good." "I am very old," Miss Marple corrected gently. "Age teaches economy. Mercy is the cheapest remedy. It costs only pride." Ellen hovered, twisting her fingers. Miss, am I to be turned out? I didn't mean wrong. I cleaned what looked dirty, Craddock answered before Miss Marple could. You are a witness, Ellen, not an accomplice. The court will see the difference. For now, you will stay with your married sister and come when summoned. Keep away from those who ask questions in a friendly voice. They do not ask to help you. Ellen bobbed a tearful curtsy and slipped away. The room felt wider. Craddock put on his hat and squared his shoulders. I'll arrange the necessary. Miss Marple, if you've a mind to walk a little, we'll call at the vicarage and secure some of the Grange stationery. It will satisfy the tidy souls at the yard. Tidy souls prefer seals, Miss Marple observed, rising. But margins will serve. Outside, the world resumed its proper scale. Hedges, puddles, a robin intent upon its own business. The village, when crisis passes, contracts to the size of its habits. On the way, Craddock said, "What will the jury make of motive?" "They will understand humiliation," Miss Marple said. "Women know its taste as men know fear." Beatrice was not jealous. She was managerial. She could endure loneliness, but not ridicule. The thought of being reorganized by her husband, of becoming a figure in other women's talk, offended her sense of order. She corrected the world, at terrible cost. Corrections always cost. She forgot that errors are how people live together. Without them, only rules remain, and rules make poor company. Make poor company. Make poor. At the vicarage, Griselda received them, and expressed a shuddering interest that would later become a cautionary anecdote about trays. The vicar fetched ink, blotting paper, and a sheaf of the Grange's notepaper saved from a parish appeal. Craddock, who enjoyed a practical spectacle, watched as Miss Marple compared margins, counted watermark intervals, and noted the faint habitual pressure where a careful hand paused before a capital. Small things, yes, but threads, and when one gathers enough thread, the weave insists upon its pattern. On the path back they met Dr. Haydock. "The captain will live to be tiresome," he announced. "I have scolded him for his constitution. I shall scold him again for his morals when he is fit to argue." "That will do him good," Miss Marple said. Haydock peered under his brows. "You are pale. Sit when you get home and take something sweet. Even you are not steel." "I am brown paper tied with string," she said. "Useful but not heroic. I shall drink cocoa." By late afternoon the news had crept across hedges and through shop doors. It arrived at Miss Marple's gate already embroidered and left her stoop nearly respectable again. She read a chapter of a moral novel, failed to admire it, and took up her knitting. The cat found her lap. Outside, rooks argued like old men, who decided long ago never to change their minds. There was one last call. Major Fenton paused at her gate, hat in hand. "Forgive me," he said, not quite entering. "For trespassing in that room, for making a noise when quiet was needed." "Forgiveness is hardly mine to give," Miss Marple said. "But you have chosen humility today, which becomes you better than cologne." He managed a rueful smile. "I'll remember that." He touched the brim and went away lighter. Evening gathered sensibly. At 9, Inspector Craddock telephoned to say London's report supported their conclusions. The stopper held a trace of cyanide in its groove. The rag held both cyanide and minute bright particles from powdered glass. The forged notes bore indentations matching a habit of practicing capitals on the page beneath. "A tidy case," he said, and caught himself. "God forgive me." "God forgives many tidy things," Miss Marple replied, "but it is better when people do not require it." She set down the receiver and let the house be still. Presently she drew her notebook and wrote, quite small, "The colonel who died twice, once by arrangement, once by exposure. Pride the motive. Order the method, muddle the witness, mercy the conclusion. She closed the book, touched the cat's ear, and listened to the clock choose each second with care. Tomorrow, roses would require deadheading, and the vicarage would need shortbread for a bazaar. Murder had run its course. Life, which is messier and kinder, would take up the rest. The next morning brought pale sun, and the particular quiet that follows thunder. At Inspector Craddock's request, Miss Marple went early to the Grange, while Ellen, red-eyed but efficient, supervised the packing of Beatrice's boxes under the constable's eye. The house, relieved of its mistress, already looked surprised by itself. In the study she paused by the desk where the stopper had found its mark. A faint ring still shadowed the blotter. She thought of all the evenings when a man had sat there believing himself master of his small kingdom, and of one evening when another sovereignty had quietly asserted itself. Then she turned to the window and admired the garden, which did not know about prisons and never would. Craddock joined her. "You were right about everything that mattered," he said simply. "No," Miss Marple answered. "I was merely right about people. It is the only subject on which experience is almost reliable." The village resumed itself in practical ways. That afternoon, as villages do, like a rug shaken out and smoothed. Mrs. Weatherby at the post office took down the black-edged notice for the Grange and put up the harvest list. At the grocer's, Mr. Badger sold syrup and remarked that storms clean gutters, because people will not. The Blue Boar polished its brass and hung a sign about flasks. Habits went on speaking, which is how villages forgive what they cannot forget. Miss Marple, who had slept well and taken her tea in the garden while the cat made a show of ignoring birds, walked to the lane where raspberries were sold by punnet and bought two. She liked to do ordinary things after extraordinary days. It taught the nerves their place. When she returned, she found Lydia Harcourt waiting by the gate, uneasy as a visitor to a dentist who has met a priest instead. Miss Marple ushered her in and set the raspberries on a plate with a jug of cream. "I cannot repay you," Lydia began. "You needn't," Miss Marple said. "Repayment is a kind of chain. We will have fruit, and you shall tell me where you intend to go." "To Much Benham, if they will have me. I shall teach French to tradesmen's daughters, and speak English to the butcher. I will keep my curtains plain. I have written to Paris to say I am not returning. One cannot live always among one's memories. They learn the house and refuse to pay rent." "That is sensible," Miss Marple said. "Senses, if asked politely, do what is required." Lydia smiled a little and ate a raspberry with attention. Stephen sent word from the infirmary. He is sorry in the way men are sorry when they are alive and cannot help it. He says he will give up the paper to Mr. Larch without payment if I promise never to write to him again. "An attractive bargain," Miss Marple murmured. "Promise to forget a man to gain the right to be forgotten by him. It is the kind of exchange that pleases the vain. Take it, my dear, and be busy." "I will try," Lydia said. She rose then, and her farewell felt like the closing of a door that had been left on the latch too long. In the afternoon, Inspector Craddock called with a look of moderate relief that suited him. Triumph never did. He brought a thin folder and a newspaper cut with the half-accuracy that villages require. "There will be an inquest," he said, "and then the rest will pass into the hands that keep such things. Harcourt will testify to the note and the flask. The Yard is satisfied with the stopper. Mrs. Carstone has made a statement that is neither confession nor defence, which in its way is both. A tidy woman to the last," Miss Marple observed. "If I were to advise the law, which I should not, I would suggest that tidy criminals require very tidy juries. Untidy minds forgive more easily." Craddock laughed under his breath. The coroner is a muddler, you will be glad to know. He always loses his spectacles halfway through a question and then asks a better one without them. They spoke of small things then, as one does when the large thing has been acknowledged. He mentioned the vicar's sermon would be on wrath that disguises itself as rectitude. She recommended the scones at the tea tent. Before he went away, he paused at the gate. "You called it the colonel who died twice," he said, "once in his study and again when the truth came out. I have been thinking there was a third death as well." "In the marriage," Miss Marple said softly. "It died quietly long before, under the weight of bargains. Many respectable funerals happen without anyone ringing the bell." He touched his hat and left, and Miss Marple went indoors to write 2 notes. One to the cottage agent in Much Benham on behalf of Lydia. One to Dr. Haydock recommending a tonic for the captain's constitution, which, she added, would improve chiefly by being bored with himself. Then she tied on her gardening apron and went into the back border to deadhead the roses. People always admire the blooms, she reflected, and it is the snipping that keeps them admirable. There is a justice in that. By evening the village had largely managed its transformation of calamity into anecdote. At the club, Major Fenton, true to his promise, spoke of weather and cricket. Mrs. Price Ridley informed a circle of listeners that she had suspected Laurel all along, and was contradicted by Mrs. Hartnell, who said it had been the stopper in her mind from the first. The Blue Boar's landlord declared he would accept no more flasks left on tables. His wife said he had never accepted them before, which made the rule easy to keep. Mr. Clement drafted his sermon and crossed out the word sin twice in favour of habit, which seemed to him both kinder and truer. It was near dusk when Ellen came, hat in hand, to Miss Marple's gate and asked for a word. She stood straight as if taking a scolding would be easier that way. "I am to go to my sister's," she said, "till they want me. Will they keep me on, do you think?" "I think the Grange will need someone who knows where everything goes," Miss Marple said. "Houses dislike strangers long after people have ceased to. But do not be in a hurry to return. Let the house forget a little, as you must." Ellen nodded, biting her lip. "I never meant to harm. I only ever wanted things to shine." "Brightness can be blinding," Miss Marple answered. "Leave a little thumbprint now and then. It keeps us honest. It keeps us honest. When Ellen had gone, night gathered with that thoroughness rural places admire. The scent of damp earth rose like a decent hymn. Miss Marple closed her windows and set her lamp. She took up her knitting, and as the needles moved, she allowed her mind to idle among small truths, that people tidy themselves into corners. That kindness is a sort of untidiness, and therefore necessary. That order comforts so long as it does not claim authority over the heart. The cat leapt to the sill and stared into the dark with purpose. Miss Marple smiled, finished a row, and laid the work aside. Tomorrow there would be the bazaar to organise, and a letter from her niece about the tiresomeness of modern trains. The world, properly speaking, is never solved. It is merely kept in hand. She turned down her lamp and went to bed, thinking, as she often did, that the best victories are small and recurring. Sleep took her quickly. Outside, the hedges kept their shapes, the lanes remembered their puddles, and the Grange, losing one mistress and awaiting another, stood black against a sky full of forgiving stars. In the morning there would be raspberries again, and the patient business of living among other people, with all their muddles, all their bargains, and all their secret mercies, would continue. The inquest was held 3 days later, in the modest hall beside St. Mary Mead's Church, where the carved pews had heard more gossip than hymns. Inspector Craddock gave his evidence in steady tones, describing the poisoned stopper, the muddled tray, the forged notes, Dr. Haydock confirmed the presence of cyanide and explained its bitter almond odour to a jury that nodded gravely. Captain Harcourt, pale but alive, muttered his piece about the letter that summoned him and the sudden burning in his throat. Major Fenton gave clipped answers, careful now, his temper under control. Lydia Harcourt, veiled in black, spoke little, her words trembling but clear. And then Miss Marple was called, though she was not sworn, for it was understood that her evidence was more observation than fact. She sat primly, hands folded, and spoke of trays moved when they ought not be, of a stopper that rolled where it could not have rolled by chance, of notes written too tidily, and of a woman whose life was built upon bargains and rules. She did not accuse. She merely described in the same mild voice she might use to discuss mildew on roses. Yet when she finished, the picture was whole, and even the coroner, who had mislaid his spectacles twice, did not require them to see it. The verdict of the jury was wilful murder against Beatrice Carston. It was returned without fuss, though the foreman cleared his throat as if he would have liked to add something gentler. Beatrice herself sat unmoving, her head high, as though the pronouncement were merely another household duty she had already accounted for. She was taken away without a scene, and the hall emptied into sunshine that made the whole affair feel like an uneasy dream. In the days that followed, the village began its slow work of turning tragedy into talk. Mrs. Price Ridley declared she had long suspected Beatrice's temper. Mrs. Hartnell argued she had always seemed too calm, which amounted to the same thing. The vicar preached on pride, while his wife worried about the fate. The Blue Boar returned to its trade, though the landlord insisted no flasks be placed on tables again. Lydia Harcourt removed to Much Benham, where she rented a small cottage and began cautiously to build a life that was hers alone. Captain Harcourt, once mended, departed abruptly, and no one grieved his absence. Major Fenton kept quieter at the club, though he still tapped his glass when thoughtful. Ellen stayed with her sister, and in time found another place where her eagerness to polish would be less dangerous. Inspector Craddock, before leaving, called on Miss Marple with a bouquet of dahlias from his aunt's garden. "I owe you a debt," he said simply. "You see what we cannot." She smiled, arranging the flowers in a jug. "Not what you cannot, Inspector, only what you do not trouble to notice. People show themselves in the smallest things. How they write, how they clean, how they fear a margin left untidy. It is a habit with me to look. And what do you make of it all in the end?" Miss Marple folded her hands. "That the Colonel died twice, once at his desk where pride met poison, and again when the truth was spoken, for then the life he had lived, all its bargains and silences, was judged at last. Beatrice, too, will die twice, once in her cell, and again in the minds of those who turn her into a story. That is always the way." Craddock looked at her a moment longer, then tipped his hat and left. Miss Marple carried the dahlias into her parlour, where the cat lay curled by the hearth. She set the jug on the table, took up her knitting, and allowed the needles to click softly in the quiet. Outside, the village resumed its small and steady life. Children laughed in the lane, the church bell tolled the hour, and roses bent under the weight of late summer bloom. Murder had come and gone, as it sometimes did even in the most peaceful corners of England. But St. Mary Mead endured, with its gossip and its gardens, its bargains and its mercies. And Miss Marple, wise in the ways of human frailty, sat content, knowing that while order could be broken and pride could kill, life, untidy and forgiving, always found a way to go on.